Our second reading is the story from Mark, chapter 6, verses 31 through 44. Jesus said to the apostles, "Come away by yourselves to some place more remote and rest a while." For there were many people coming and going, and the apostles hadn't had time to eat. So they went away in a boat to a deserted area. The people saw them leaving, and many recognized them. So they ran together on foot from all the cities and got there ahead of the apostles. When Jesus went ashore, there was a large crowd waiting for him, and he felt compassion for them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. So he began to teach them many things. By now, it was getting very late, and his disciples came up to him and said, "This is a deserted place, and it's very late. Why not dismiss them so they can go to the nearby farms and villages and buy something to eat?" Jesus replied, "Give them something to eat yourselves." They answered, "You want us to spend half a year's wages on bread for them to eat?" "How many loaves do you have?" Jesus asked. "Go look." When they found out, they reported back, 5 and 2 fish. Jesus told them to have the people sit down on the grass in groups of hundreds and fifties. Then Jesus took the 5 loaves and 2 fish, raised his eyes to the heaven, and said the blessing. Jesus broke the loaves and handed them to the disciples to distribute among the people. He also passed out the 2 fish among them. They all ate until they had their fill. The disciples gathered up the leftovers and filled 12 baskets of broken bread and fish. In all, 5,000 families ate that day.
Some of us have heard this story more times than we can count. The crowd, 5 loaves, 2 fishes, 12 baskets. The miracle that keeps getting preached as a story about generosity, about abundance, or trusting God with what little you have. But hidden inside of it, so remarkable that the author of Mark only mentions it once and moves on, is the detail that changes everything. The apostles hadn't had time to eat. The disciples, the apostles, were hungry when they got on the boat. They were hungry when they got out of the boat, hungry while Jesus taught, hungry when he handed them the bread and said, "Pass bread and fish." Hunger does something to the distance between yourself and another person. It collapses it. You cannot look at another person's hunger and experience as foreign and unknown. It lives in the same place as yours. It speaks the same language as your body speaks. The disciples were not generous despite being hungry. Their hunger was what opened them to the crowd. They were not reaching across a distance. They were experiencing the same condition as the crowd. Dorothy Zula spent her life insisting on the difference between charity and solidarity. Charity gives from the other side of need. The giver remains intact. The distance between giver and receiver stays intact. Solidarity, however, gives from the inside of the need. Not "I will help you," but "I am with you." Not reaching down, but standing beside. The disciples were not the crowd's benefactors. They were the crowd's companions, equally hungry, equally without enough, and equally unwilling to let that be the last word. This is where the impossible begins. Not from strength, not from a position of abundance, not looking down at scarcity, not certain that it will work, but from hungry people choosing each other anyway. And then something moves. The recognition spread the same way as the bread is distributed further and further out. That hunger is my hunger. That face is my face. What is being offered here was not only the disciples to hold, and everyone eats, and 12 baskets remain. Think about those who've always led the movements that changed the world. Fannie Lou Hamer was a sharecropper in the Mississippi Delta, beaten and jailed trying to vote. Before she came to conscious of the civil rights movement, she did not theorize black suffering from a safe distance. She carried it deep in her own body, which is exactly why she could not stop. Cesar Chavez picked grapes before he organized the people who picked grapes. He knew the field and the work, which is why the people in the fields trusted him. Larry Kramer was HIV positive when he founded ACT UP and stood outside the FDA demanding that the government stop letting people die. He was not advocating watching from a safe distance. He was a man in the crisis, furious because of the dying were his people and also himself. Beloved, the ones who moved the world were not the ones safely above the need. They were the ones the need had already found. Not because they were more virtuous, but because their own lives put them inside the pain and the hunger. Because you cannot lead people out of a place that you've never been. But if you've been there, if you know that space from the inside, then you do not need to theorize the need. You recognize it, and the recognition moves. Last October in Portland, Oregon, a small coffee shop owner named Josh White looked at 42 million Americans losing their food assistance and felt something shift in him that he could not argue away. Now, Josh was not flush with resources. He was running a small business. And that business was being run on the margins in a very hard year. He looked at what he had: a kitchen, a neighborhood, ovens that worked. And he said, we have food. We can give that food to the people who are hungry. When someone warned him that it might cost him his business, he said, quote, if we go broke, making sure children have food for breakfast, I'm really okay with that, end quote. $184,000 arrived in just a few days. Not because he had so much, but because he understood scarcity well enough to refuse to be governed by it. The hungry feeding the hungry. An ancient accounting running its math on a street on a corner in Portland. But this type of accounting doesn't just end in Portland. Mountain Rise has resources. There are some folks in this congregation who give generously to the work they believe in, who have a history of caring about what matters. But generosity and solidarity are not the same thing. It's possible to fund work you never enter, to write a check and consider yourself done, to support a mission from your comfortable distance without ever letting it touch you or change what you do. The disciples did not fund the sharing of the bread and fish. They were too hungry and in need of food, the exact same need of the crowd. This is the difference that the story keeps pressing on to us. and there is something else worth naming. When the energy of a community turns inward, when it goes toward insisting on having things one's own way, winning arguments and circling the same disputes, rather than facing toward the crowd and waiting on the shore, the energy to care is lost in the heat of debate rather than compassion. It ultimately stops becoming the bread that satisfies. The disciples' limiting beliefs did not limit what God did. The question that the gospel asks you as a congregation is not whether you have enough. You do. The question is what becomes possible when you offer what has been offered so freely, when the energy turns outward instead of inward, when everyone's hands are in it all the way. Beloved, together, the impossible is possible. Not someday when the conditions improve, not once every question is settled, now, with what you have. Turn toward each other, toward the world that is still waiting on the shore. God has never waited for the comfortable to notice the need. God works through the hungry, through the ones who know this existence from being part of it, through the ones who cannot look at need in another face and call it someone else's problem, through us, through you, now, already enough. Amen.